Welcome back to Proxam, everybody, and today we're going to be looking at how to make the most out of your Craftworld Eldar Swooping Hawks. So, Swooping Hawks are a unit that has been very effective for Eldar. They've been in several tournament lists and so forth. So, I thought I'd make a quick kind of video on how you can make the most out of your Swooping Hawks, because they are a very effective unit, but you have to use them correctly in order to get the most out of them. And they can be a little bit difficult to use in certain situations. So we're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of the Swooping Hawks. We're going to be looking at what are the best ways to use Swooping Hawks and what they're good at. We're going to be looking at some of the most effective Swooping Hawk builds. And of course, the tips and tricks to get the most out of your Swooping Hawks that I have found to be very useful in the game. So before we get started in looking at the Swooping Hawks and their stats and so forth, their special rules and all that, I do want to look at the new changes in Nephilim a little bit and let you guys know that Swooping Hawks are indeed going to be getting a slight points increase. They're going to be increased from 18 points per model to 20 points per model with the coming nerfs. Those should come in a couple of days, I think on the 25th, if I'm not mistaken. And this is in addition to a slew of other nerfs that Eldar are going to get. Now, basically, I've been looking at these nerfs pretty critically over the last few days, and I've been talking to a couple of other Eldar players that are in my local gaming group that we commonly talk about different strategies and things like that. So, from what I can tell, Swooping Hawks are actually going to probably remain a really good unit. However, on the whole, Eldar have significant points nerfs almost across the board. Same thing goes for Tyranids and Tau, basically the three, I guess the triumvirate of competitive lists and tournaments in the recent months. Now, what I can tell you, though, is I'm going to be doing an honest review of the point changes and the rule changes, because we did get several rule changes as well that might disappoint a couple of you. It certainly disappointed me when I saw it, as well as a couple of the Eldar players that play in my group. But, I'm going to give you an honest review on it, tell you what I really think about it. And I'm going to put it in a positive light for you guys. The reason why I want to do this, I don't want to remain negative. I've heard a lot of reviews, people that are just basically, saying that the Eldar are unplayable and that they're terrible now and that they're not going to even, they're a C-tier faction in tournaments. I actually think this is a lot of hype and, to be honest with you, BS. I don't think that they're going to be a C-tier faction. I do think that they're not going to totally sweep through tournaments anymore. But I still think Eldar are going to be very powerful, and I think some of the balance changes were needed. Some of them weren't, though, and I think those are the ones that I'm most critical of, I think. But in general, I think it's okay. I think we got off a little bit easy in some areas, and we took a harsh hit in other areas that we may have not needed it in. But anyway, I'm going to give you basically an honest review of that in a couple of days. So Swooping Hawks, their stats are pretty much unchanged, though. They have a very fast movement. They're movement 14. They have an average save of 4+. And like I said, they're probably going to be 20 points per model, which is still not that bad for what they can do objective-wise. This is a very strong objective-based unit, and their new points cost is now reflecting that in a very major way. So let's go ahead and look at their weapons. So they're armed with a Last Blaster. So a Last Blaster is a pretty solid medium-range weapon, has range 24. Assault 4 has a great volume of fire. Strength 4, which isn't that great, no AP value, of course, and damage 1. The cool thing about this, though, is that 6s to hit automatically wound the target. So that just adds to the damage that the unit can do and makes them pretty reliable against infantry. And it also allows them to take out, a couple wounds on bigger stuff, too. However, when we look at the weapons of the Exarch, the Hawk's Talon, and the Power Sword, I think these are really just not needed. The Hawk's Talon does add a little bit of damage, adds +1 strength and -1 AP. But in general, I don't think it's worth 10 points, and especially with the points increases that Eldar are going to face, I think we're going to have to tighten our belts on some of these weapon upgrades. So I don't know about you guys, but I'll probably be going without the Hawk's Talon, and the Power Sword is very useless because the Hawks are never going to be in close combat in the first place unless you've made a terrible, terrible mistake, or unless your opponent had specific designs for them and they got caught somehow. But either way, they probably shouldn't be in close combat, and you should probably always be aware of any kind of tricks that the enemy has to engage them. So, Swooping Hawks also have a 5+ invulnerable save. Just like all Aspect Warriors, this makes them more durable against high AP weapons that would ignore their normal armor save. Typically, though, this isn't really that needed, because Swooping Hawks have a great way of getting out of line of sight via their Sky Leap ability, which we're going to actually talk about in just a second, which is probably the single most powerful ability on any Aspect Warrior unit when it comes to staying safe. So Sky Leap basically does this. In your shooting phase, instead of making a battle focus move, you can actually take this unit and move it anywhere you want on the board as long as it's outside of 9 inches of enemy models. So, this allows them to essentially reposition anywhere they want to be. So this is great for staying safe, it's great for board control and capturing objectives as well. It's an absolutely fantastic ability, and the reason why Swooping Hawks are getting a points increase, let's be honest. Now, as for their sudden assault ability, this allows the unit to deploy as reinforcements, but to be honest, I don't think it's really recommended because you can't use Sky Leap in the same turn that you use this. So, because Sky Leap keeps the unit so safe, I really just don't think it's worth it to use Sudden Assault, because from turn 1, you could just be Sky Leaping away if you wanted to. As for the Exarch powers, the Swooping Hawk Exarch has rapid redeployment, basically allows them to shoot in a turn which they fell back, but this is fairly useless in my experience, and in most cases, either the Swooping Hawks will be murdered outright, or, they're never going to find combat in the first place, because they shouldn't be in combat. Because of Sky Leap, you should be able to always get them to a safe position to where they don't need to use this. Now, the next 2 Exarch powers are really where it's at. We have Suppressing Fire, which is amazing for canceling your opponent's actions, and denying enemy overwatch or set to defend. A lot of secondary objectives require actions to be performed, so your Swooping Hawks can actually cancel a lot of enemy actions before they can be completed with this ability. Very powerful and a very clutch ability when you need it. The other one is Winged Evasion, and this one's pretty good because it allows the Hawks to become a little bit more durable against incoming fire. Now, you might be thinking, well, they should be behind obscuring terrain, so this isn't that great of an ability. But it is good against indirect fire weapons, especially since Imperial Guard just recently got a little bit of a buff. You're going to be seeing more Imperial Guard on the field. They have a lot of indirect fire weapons, and at least this way, if the opponent wants to shoot a Basilisk or a Wyvern at you, they're going to be at -1 to hit. And that way, it'll take more than one tank to kill your Swooping Hawk unit, and that's one less tank that the enemy has to fire at other stuff. So, the Grenade Pack is an interesting one. Basically, it's very niche. You have to be able to move over an enemy unit. And again, if you advance, you can't battle focus, which means you can't Sky Leap. So, realistically, you're only going to be wanting to use this if you can use your normal 14 inches to move over an enemy unit. So this basically means the enemy has to be very close to you. But if the enemy does make this mistake and gets a little bit too close, it does decent mortal wound damage, but it's really nothing to write home about. And to be honest with you, I don't know if it's worth the command point. Especially with a smaller unit of 5, you're really not going to be getting much more than a couple of mortal wounds. And it's definitely not the grenade pack of last edition's codex, which was absolutely insane, right? So, probably not the best stratagem to go with, but it's there if you need it in very niche situations. Now, what are the best ways exactly to use Swooping Hawks, and what are they exactly good at, right? So, Swooping Hawks are very good at objective and board control. They're exceptional at taking out light infantry or harassing heavier targets, and they're generally good at damage avoidance, disruption, and supporting your other units on the battlefield. In objective and board control, Swooping Hawks can use their Skyleap ability to be anywhere you need them on the board whenever you want. If you want them on the left side of the board, they can be there. On the right side of the board the next turn, they can be there as well. And they're great at capturing uncontested objectives in the late game via their Skyleap ability, which is their signature ability. And honestly, again, like I said, probably the reason why they got that points increase. It's just very powerful for board control. They're also not bad at taking out light infantry and harassing heavier targets. So their weapon is nothing to write home about, but it absolutely devastates light infantry units. It has a large volume of anti-infantry fire. It also does mortal wounds on 6s to hit, and it's a good harassment tool even against tougher targets, things like Tyranid warriors and stuff like that. It has no problem being able to wound them because 6s auto wound when you roll them to hit. And especially since we're seeing pretty good buffs on armies like Orcs and Imperial Guard, I think Swooping Hawks are honestly going to be one of the most important units to keep in your back pocket in matchups like this. Especially in all-comers lists, I think you'll always want at least one unit of Swooping Hawks, not only for the objective and board control aspect, but also just to contribute to taking out light infantry like Orcs and Imperial Guard infantry units. And Swooping Hawks are also very good at damage avoidance, disruption, and support. Skyleap is an absolutely great ability at allowing the unit to stay alive the entire game, and on top of that, the winged evasion makes them harder to hit against those line-of-sight ignoring weapons. They can disrupt enemy units with the Exarch Power suppressive fire, they can deny overwatch, set to defend, and basically cancel all actions that specific unit was performing that turn, if you don't whiff your roll. And to be honest with you, rolling 3d6, on average, you're going to be able to beat a lot of units leadership. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, but it has whiffed for me before, I have to admit. They're also very good at supporting other units with their powers and abilities. They have great shooting and great ability to basically eliminate targets that are already low on strength, that only have a couple models left in the unit, and things like that. So I've been using Swooping Hawks for quite a while, and I think they really have two builds that come to mind when I've been playing them. And the two builds that I've found most effective are the Swooping Menace and the Evasive Flock. So of course I just made these names up, right? They're not out of the book or anything like that. But these are the builds that I've actually found a lot of success with in my games, and that have made Swooping Hawks an MVP in honestly a lot of my games that I've played. So the first one is the Swooping Menace. So this is a 5-man unit of Swooping Hawks with the suppressive fire Exarch power. And this unit is fantastic at disrupting enemy actions and preventing overwatch and set to defend. So basically what this unit does is it flies around the board anytime an enemy wants to perform an action or try to get a secondary objective by performing an action or something like that. This unit shoots at them and disrupts that action and makes that impossible to score. So if I think my opponent is going to try to perform an action with one of his units on the left flank, I might pull my Swooping Hawks from the right flank to the left flank a turn before. Then when my opponent starts doing his action, the Swooping Hawks are in a position to deny that. They're also really good at denying overwatch and set to defend. So if I want one of my units to charge in and I don't have a unit of Howling Banshees or anything like that, but I still want to deny their overwatch so that they don't fry me, then I might use this unit to make sure that happens. Also, this unit, the Swooping Menace, plays a very excellent support role while still being able to capture objectives and be a good board control unit. Now the next build is a little bit different. It's the Evasive Flock. So instead of disrupting enemy units' actions, the Evasive Flock is a unit of 5 to 10 Swooping Hawks with the Winged Evasion Exarch power. And basically, it's a powerful shooting unit that is very hard to kill even with direct fire, indirect fire weapons. It's great at supporting your forward units and controlling objectives at the same time, and is fairly tough to pin down and take out. Now, before the changes to command points, I did give this unit the Phoenix Plume Exarch relic, but this is one command point, and I think it's a little bit hard to justify that now. But if you're still keen on doing it, a great build with this Swooping Hawk unit is a unit of 10 with the Phoenix Plume and the Winged Evasion Exarch power. It's very hard to actually kill this unit, especially with indirect fire weapons, as most armies are going to be hitting on 5s. You're going to be getting +1 to your armor save, so you're going to be getting a 3+ essentially, and on top of that, you're going to be getting a 5+ feel no pain essentially as well. So very survivable unit. They can be very hard for your enemy to shoot. However, keep in mind though that with the command point changes, this might be a little bit harder to do. So if you do want to go for that, make sure you have enough command points, because in Strike Force games, you're only going to have about 6 to work with from now on. Now, I really like the Evasive Flock because it's so hard to pin down. It makes it very hard for the enemy to actually stop. So, for example, if your enemy only has 1 to 2 indirect fire weapons, oftentimes they're just going to be wasting their time shooting at this unit because it's not really going to die that easily. And from my experience, I've actually had several opponents ignore them completely because of this combination. So they can also play mind games on your enemy. If your enemy knows that not only are they going to be at -1 to hit, but you're going to be getting a bunch of other defensive buffs against their indirect fire weapons, chances are they're just going to say, you know what, I'm not going to value trade with this, and I'm going to just shoot something else entirely. I'm not even going to go for the Swooping Hawks. I'm going to shoot at something else. And that's what I found a lot of times with this. So sometimes, even if you're not being shot at, it's good to have that because it's going to dictate how your enemy shoots at that unit. So oftentimes, I've had a unit like this survive the entire game just because of those defensive buffs, and my opponent refuses to shoot at them. So let's take a look at some of the tips and tricks to get the most out of your Swooping Hawks. And I think basically the best way to get a lot of value out of your Swooping Hawks is with what I like to call the art of the Sky Leap. So this is their signature ability. It's very powerful and makes them an exceptional board control unit and objective controller. Let's take a look. So our first scenario here, I have a unit of Swooping Hawks behind the ruins. We see that there is now an enemy unit on the objective on the left flank. So the Swooping Hawks are going to come out of the ruins and they're going to shoot against the unit on the objective. Now, ideally, you'd want to kill the unit, but sometimes Swooping Hawks don't quite have the firepower depending on what unit that is, and you may need some other units to shoot at it. But regardless, you do want to be able to take out that unit. So once you take that unit out, you use your Sky Leap ability, and you can be anywhere on the board. So the next turn, I'm going to move my unit to the other side of the board, to the right side, to be ready to do the same exact thing to another enemy unit that might be on that objective that turn. Now, the important thing to this is you have to look at your opponent's forces to see where he's going, and you have to mirror his movements. You have to be where he is. So if he didn't have anything on the right flank of the board, you might want to do something else with your Swooping Hawks, or you might just want to move them back behind the same exact piece of terrain. That is up to you. But the important part is that you want to move your Swooping Hawks to whatever area of the board the enemy is going for objectives on so that you can shoot them off of it and then land safely behind line of sight blocking terrain via their Sky Leap ability. Or you could do something a little bit cheekier, which is, if it is safe to do so, you could move your Swooping Hawk unit in their deployment zone. For example, you can shoot at a unit that's on their objective, kill that unit with your army, and then move the Swooping Hawks into their deployment zone behind their own ruins if it's basically unoccupied. And essentially, this is great for getting behind the enemy army and scoring on secondaries like Line Breaker and things like this. Now, I am going to also do a review of the Nephilim secondaries pretty soon. Unfortunately, I believe the Eldar got a few nerfs here too, from what I've seen so far. But I still think there are a lot of strong secondaries that Eldar can. take, which are very powerful. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Now, the cool thing about this also is that once you have an enemy unit or your friendly unit in the enemy deployment zone, your opponent has to worry about something at his back. And this can force your opponent to do some things that are going to be very detrimental to his battle strategy. For example, he might have to move a unit back there to stop the Swooping Hawks. And at that point, you can just move again in the next turn to the other side of the board. So Swooping Hawks are a very annoying unit, and to be honest with you, a lot of my opponents just ignore them because the way they feel is that they're probably never going to be able to be killed. So might as well just not even try and go for other stuff that actually can be shot at. Now, the Swooping Hawks can also use their Skyleap ability as an objective tool. For example, in this diagram, we see that the Swooping Hawks have moved to the objective on the left side. So if your Swooping Hawks are in a position to capture an objective that is isolated, that your opponent can't retaliate against, but you don't have any other units in the vicinity, Swooping Hawks are a great unit for this because they can just move across the board and automatically just be there. And this is going to make it very hard for your opponent to actually do anything about it. You can score on this objective and still be in a great position the next turn to shoot and also disrupt enemy units performing last-ditch efforts at actions and things like that. And I can't tell you how many times I've had opponents just absolutely curse the Swooping Hawks because they disrupted one of their actions that they were performing when they desperately needed to catch up in secondary points. And it happens at least once a game when I run these guys where I will deny one of the enemy's actions and my opponent will lose 2 or 3 basically victory points, right? So Swooping Hawks can not only score victory points themselves on things like line breaker and isolated objectives, but they can also deny enemies their victory points. So it's a very good objective controller and swing unit that honestly I think will remain in pretty much most competitive Eldar lists in some capacity. Whether or not it's just as a very minimum unit or not, Swooping Hawks are still very effective. They're a very objective-oriented unit. They can just run circles around your opponent's army while also dealing pretty good damage. They're not weak damage. They're not strength 3 anymore like they used to be. And they can be very disruptive to your opponent's plans. And like I said, I really do think that a lot of the points nerfs are going to, in fact, impact a lot of the choices that we make as a faction on what units we pick and so forth. However, I think Swooping Hawks are still going to remain a pretty strong utility unit, and they're going to be in several competitive lists because of their ability to, again, not only take away your opponent's secondaries, but also score on objectives yourself and be able to just, kind of run circles around your enemy army. Now, I have been in talks with, again, like I said, a couple of the players in my group who play Eldar. And in general, I think that we've come to the consensus that these point nerfs and so forth and rules nerfs are going to hit the Eldar meta pretty hard, but we still think that there's going to be some dominant units and Craftworld traits that aren't going to go away in the competitive scene. And I will talk about those in a future video. But I just want to mention real quick, I don't think Hail of Doom's going anywhere, even though it's going to be nerfed. It's going to be basically a trait exclusive, which means that you can only take Hail of Doom if you choose that trait and no others. So you can't combine them with any of the other far-flung Craftworld traits. Honestly, I thought about this for a little bit, and I thought this is a clever way to balance it, but then I remembered that it's really powerful, and it's still really good. So I see competitive Eldar players probably either doing one or two things. Really doubling down on Hail of Doom and just choosing more optimal units, like Dire Avengers, which are still really good. They only got a 1-point nerf, so they're still pretty much one of the premier Eldar units. Or I see people going to the Uthway Craftworld, which I actually predict is going to be the most popular Craftworld after the nerfs because a lot of their units like warlocks and things like that, from what I can tell so far, haven't been nerfed, haven't been touched. So again, I'm going to have to look at that again and see, because I haven't looked too much at warlocks, but I haven't heard anything about warlocks. And my friend who plays Uthway said that from what he sees, warlocks are not touched. The Farseers are the ones that are getting the points increases. But again, I'll have to double check on that. Anyway, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys learned something about Swooping Hawks and maybe picked up a few tricks and tips that you can use in your games. I still think this is a very competitive unit, and I think that the points nerfs are not going to really affect the effectiveness of Swooping Hawks on the battlefield, because as far as I can tell, none of the abilities of Swooping Hawks have actually changed. They just got a slight points nerf, which honestly, in my opinion, isn't enough to make them an unviable unit in most of our lists for the role that they perform. And in fact, again, I see a lot of people just doubling down on this unit, maybe only running one unit instead of 2 units, but nevertheless, running at least 1 unit of Swooping Hawks. All right, everybody, that's it for today's video. If you guys have any comments or questions, or just, want to leave a comment or general question, let me know. I'd be more than happy to answer them, and we have more to come. All right, everybody, peace out. See you guys later. Hope you have a good one, and stay tuned for more videos. And don't be too bummed out by the Eldar nerf, because most of it, you guys are some of the most creative minds, to be honest, in the Warhammer community. Playing Craftworld Eldar is already extremely hard and a challenge. And I think together we can come out of it alive. So don't worry too much about that. Let's, put our creativity back into it and see what we can come up with and stuff like that. I'm going to be having a video out on some of the new changes and what I think of the new changes in a couple days. All right, everybody. See you next time. Have a good one.